I think this year in January there was a documentary released about this whole case, no, by someone called Tim Livingston. He's a podcast host for something called The Whistleblower. I haven't seen that, but it's on my watch list now. But it's very interesting.
Yeah, because case. we're coming up on the 25th anniversary.
Oh yes.
Next January will be 25 years that case happened. So
I see.
Yeah, it's as a matter of fact, it's so interesting with that case. I literally still have my investigative file of all the documents, everything that happened in that case. Yeah,
it's amazing. It's a piece of history there. Tell me, shall we talk a little bit about the World Trade Center bombing in 1993? Because that's another really interesting one.
Yeah, interesting. So in 1993, there was a group of Muslim guys, Palestinian, Pakistani, and they had developed a plot to get a panel truck, like a truck, and they loaded the truck with these chemicals. And the mastermind of the plan was an engineer, and he put a particular timer onto the chemicals that would allow the person to drive the truck into the World Trade Center and leave, and then he could activate the timer, which it exploded. And so the client that we represented, his name was Abdul Salaam, and he was
the driver.
Palestinian, and he lived in Jersey City, which is just across the George Washington Bridge from Manhattan. And he was going to the local masjid or mosque in Jersey City. He attended the mosque where Sheikh Abdul Rahman, the blind sheikh from Egypt, was the sheikh.
That's right, Abdul Rahman, yes.
Yes. And so anyway, that case, Muhammad was assigned to the Federal Defender Office in Manhattan, which is downtown Manhattan. And the Federal Defender Office in Manhattan had 3 investigators, but they were Latino and Hispanic. And so because of the cultural differences, the investigators were not able to get anyone to cooperate with them when they went to the community that Muhammad was from, because they didn't trust him. And so several months was passing, and there was no progress in the case. So there was a Muslim journalist following the case that knows me. And he would check in with the director of the Federal Defender Office in New York often, trying to get a update on the progress in Muhammad's case. And he kept telling them, well, we're having these difficulties. No one would talk to us. And the journalist said, well, would it make a difference if you had a Muslim investigator? And so the director said, yeah, but I don't have one. He says, I know one. And so he gave him my name. That director in New York called my director in Atlanta. We had a conference, and they asked me if I would get involved in the case. And so during the interview process, I kept getting pelted with questions about, well, do you speak Arabic fluently, and would you be able to make contact? And I was like, it's not the Arabic speaking that is an issue in this case. I said, it's a Muslim Islamic issue, and it has to do with culture. Yeah. It has to do with nuances that only Muslims do. There are protocols. And I said, so you have to understand that in the Arab world, there are millions of Arabs that speak Arabic, and they're non-Muslims. Yeah. They're Christians or whatever. I said, so it's not just the language part of it, though I speak a little Arabic. It's the culture. I said, so if you bring me in on this case, for the first week, all I'm going to do is go to that mosque and pray with them. That's it. And I said, then after a week, I would introduce myself to the emir, the leader of the community, and the imam, and with their permission and their assistance, start talking to other folks in the community so we can help Muhammad. Wow. I said, so if you're willing to do that, I'll come in on the case. And of course, they agreed. And so basically, they dispatched me to New York, and I worked in New York for 2 months on that case.
Wow.
And there were just thousands of documents involved. But the short of the case is, when the FBI formulates a case against you, they're really thorough. But they didn't need a lot of assistance because Muhammad helped them out a lot, being that he never would have got apprehended because the mastermind, the day of the bombing, he was on the first flight out back to Pakistan.
Ramzi Youssef, yeah?
And Ramzi Youssef, yes, he was gone. He was the day of, he was gone. And it took them years to
get him back.
I think they eventually apprehended
That's right.
him, yes. But Muhammad Salam, he went right back to Jersey City, and he was in his neighborhood, just whatever. So Muhammad goes back to the truck rental place where he had rented the truck a few days after the bombing, and he went back there and insisted that they return the deposit to him that he has to. You rent a vehicle, you have to put a deposit up, assuring that you won't damage or you'll bring the vehicle back. He goes back to this rental facility demanding the refund of his deposit. And he's quite adamant and emotional about it. And the clerk is like, okay, you want a refund, but where's my truck? And Muhammad is like, oh, it was stolen. He was like, okay, so if it's stolen, where's your police report? Did you report it? And he was like, no, I don't have a police report. He said, well, sir, I'll be happy to give you your refund, but I need a police report.
Or my truck back.
So Muhammad leaves. And when that truck exploded, I mean, one of the few things that survived on that vehicle was the vehicle identification tag that's attached to the engine. And the FBI had the VIN on that vehicle. That's and so then they were able to days later identify that the rental place that it came from. But that rental clerk himself, after having that exchange with Muhammad, became it's like he started putting things together. It was like, I wonder if that was my truck that was involved in that bombing. So he calls the FBI. The FBI, they tell him, call Muhammad back and tell him to come and get his deposit. And incredibly stupid, he goes back to get his deposit.
$500.
It's crazy. It was crazy. And so, but I worked on that case for 2 months, and I was embedded in New York. But it was so interesting because at that time that I was working on it, I was staying in Uptown, like 192nd in Dyckman. And so I would take the train into Manhattan every morning. And it was just so interesting taking the train in and seeing people with newspapers reading about that case every day.
Yeah,
nothing is more rewarding or exhilarating in this type of work, to work on a major case like that. And you see people consuming it. And it's like, wow, this is it shows you the magnitude of what you're actually doing. Yes.
That case was really important because I think that was in some ways a prelude to September 11th, wasn't it? Because Ramzi Youssef's uncle was Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or someone from Pakistan who was then involved in September 11th.
I'm telling you, it was so, in the government, what it did was it shined an entire light on the United States intelligence community of how deficient they were in sharing information. And it alerted them to the extent where they put everyone under the spotlight nationally. And they started to cooperating and communicating with one another just on a whole different level. And in that case, the thing that was so surprising to me in that case was when I read the indictment read like a novel. But there are other things in the indictment was every Muslim imam or leader in the United States at that time was listed as an unindicted co-conspirator. Oh, wow. I mean, I was like, and in order to do that, you have to be able to justify attaching them to the case. So you have to have a narrative.
Yes.
And just reading it, I was like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever read.
Wow.
You've got to be kidding me. And so, I'm surprised they didn't include Yusuf. What is your countryman's name? I forgot.
Yusuf Islam. I think he was having problems later on entering America, like after September 11th. Yeah,
Exactly. But even leading up to that, after the World Trade Center, was shortly after that he started getting a lot of issues too. Even before
I remember
9/11.
that. Yeah,
and it was because of that the first World Trade Center. Like I said, they didn't list him as an unindicted co-conspirator, but his name was listed.
Wow.
You know, I mean, they had reference to him because they had reference to him, other people having a fellowship or, with him. And it was crazy.
So was it a very difficult time for Muslims? A bit like after September 11th in America?
No, not so much.
Okay.
No, not so much because I think that because there wasn't much damage. And I think there were a couple of people that died because of smoke inhalation, or there were like some janitors or maintenance people that were in the immediate area. But because it didn't do as much damage, it kind of was a story, and then it kind of just fizzled out. And so it was more of a thing in New York, New Jersey thing than it was for the rest of the country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, brother,
but real quickly, ultimately, we went to trial, and of course, he was convicted. And I believe he was sentenced to like 230 something years or something of that nature. Yes.
So he's still alive? He's still in prison now?
You know what? I would imagine, but I think he got sentenced to the Supermax facility that's in Colorado, which is literally underground.
Oh, wow.
And so was, and as a result of that case, they were able to use information out of that case, and they eventually indicted Sheikh Abdul Rahman, and he was in prison.
Oh, wow.
And then he was in, and I think he passed away some years ago, but he was in prison in that Supermax facility in Colorado.
Huh.